Welcome to the conversation with the curator. I'm Cindy Peterson, the executive director at the Taubman Museum of Art. And thank you for joining us today. And thank you, Karl. So it is with such pleasure that I welcome Karl Willers to our community here in Roanoke and to our region, as well as to, of course, the state of Virginia. Karl Willers, Ph.D., joins the Taubman Museum of Art as our new Chief Curator and Deputy Director of Exhibitions and Community Engagement. He comes to Roanoke with extensive experience as a museum curator and administrator, advanced scholarship in American and European art, beginning with the late 18th century into contemporary art. And you'll hear about his experiences as we continue this conversation, and also including the area of non-for-profit business training. He earned his Ph.D. in art history from Yale University and his M.B.A. in nonprofit organizations from Yale School of Management. New to the region, Karl enjoys watching movies, attending film festivals, as well as reading new fiction and hiking wilderness trails. So a perfect match not only for our region in terms of those things that you love to do, Karl, but also in terms of, and like I said, your extensive experience, your connections, and what you're looking to do in terms of working here at the Taubman Museum of Art as our chief curator and being part of our team. So welcome, Karl, to our community. And I'd love to start out with the question of, when did you decide that you wanted to become a museum professional and museum curator, and kind of what did that journey look like?
Thank you, Cindy, and thank everyone here at the Taubman Museum of Art for making this broadcast possible. I really began my art history career at the College of Worcester, where I did my undergraduate work. It's a small liberal arts college in Central Ohio. While I was there, I actually took an internship at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York City for a semester and apprenticed myself with Barbara Haskell, who is still a curator at the Whitney Museum. I worked with her on her Milton Avery as well as her Marston Hartley exhibitions during my time there in New York. And Barbara very much encouraged me to come back to the Whitney Museum for their independent study program in curatorial studies, which is a year-long program in curatorial studies. It's a fabulous workshop for young curators from all over the world. 10 graduate students from all over the world would come to the Whitney every year and really work as the support staff at the downtown. That was a wonderful opportunity for me. And while I was there on the program, I helped with the catalog coordination of the 1980 biennial exhibition at the Whitney Museum, as well as organized several exhibitions with co-curators there, and was hired then to direct the downtown branch of the Whitney Museum, and that really turned into a more than a decades-long career at the Whitney. I think.
And that's a perfect lead in. We're going to switch into, we have some screen shares so that those that are tuned in can see the Whitney of American Art, where we'll actually be collaborating with them in partnership as we open Vantage Points this summer and show their photography collection that you're very familiar with. And so as you're tuning in live, you can see the Whitney Museum of Art and that start of your career in that downtown branch, Karl, in those first 10 years, and all of the connection you've made with emerging scholars, as well as current curators and directors. And those for tuning in, you're welcome to put any questions in the Q&A, and I'll weave those in as I can, and also at the end. And if you're tuned in from Facebook Live, you can go ahead and put in your comments and questions, and our staff will relay those as well. So, Karl, you tell us about those connections and the emerging scholars, and that what was the most meaningful part of that experience to you?
Well, It was an amazing way to begin one's career because, as I mentioned, 10 scholars were coming into the Whitney Museum every year. I was there at the Whitney, running the downtown branch of the museum, which I think you might be seeing on your screen right now, and for a decade, and that's like over 100, wonderful professionals that I worked with and helped to train in museum work that now really do occupy the museum world, not only in this country but literally around the world. And I think what you might be seeing on your screen is a slide about the downtown branch of the Whitney Museum. During the 1980s, we really moved the museum about 4 or 5 times, but eventually it resided within Federal Reserve Plaza, which is a building in Lower Manhattan, just a couple of blocks above Wall Street and the Federal Reserve. And along with that, that's a Philip Johnson building, but within that Philip Johnson building in the lower level, Todd Williams and Billy Chen built this beautiful gallery space for the downtown Whitney. And you're looking at slides of the opening exhibition, which was made in the 60s, selections from the permanent collection of the Whitney Museum of American Art. It turned out to be a wonderful opportunity to explore the Whitney's vast collections. And as I mentioned, I was there at the Whitney for more than a decade. I was also pursuing part-time graduate studies at the Graduate Center at City University. It was a wonderful time to be studying there. It's where a lot of young professionals within the art world, pursued their graduate work in art history. I was able to study with Linda Nochlin, who's one of the great scholars of 19th and 20th century contemporary art, and also very much known as something as the mother of feminist art history. And Linda accepted the professorship of modern art at Yale toward the beginning of the 1990s, and very much just called and said that she wanted me to pursue my graduate studies full time. And which was, of course, a wonderful opportunity. I think you're looking at a picture of the Yale University Art Gallery in New Haven, Connecticut. The art gallery used to be, when I was there, just in the modernist building at the far right of that slide, and the art history department was in those buildings. But I really, in some ways, very much followed in Linda's footsteps. Wrote my dissertation on the 19th century French realist painter, Gustave Courbet. And you see their image of one of Courbet's most famous paintings, The Painter's Studio, which is subtitled A Real Allegory, summing up 7 years of my artistic life. It was painted in 1855. And my dissertation was really looking at all of the salon paintings that Courbet produced between the years 1848 and 1855, those 7 years of his artistic life. And finding both biblical and classical sources for many of the paintings, which was something of a revelation to me and to other scholars in the sense that realist painting is usually considered to have some sort of immediate access to the visual array, and the idea of there being art historical sources for such paintings is a bit radical.
I know. I look forward to hearing more about that as well. And after your time at Yale, then you returned to the Whitney to continue, sharing and working in the area of American art.
Yes, it was, again, a very wonderful opportunity. Here you see the old Royer building on 75th and Madison Avenue on the Upper East Side in New York, which is sort of the Whitney that I think people still remember and know. Now the Whitney's located in Lower Manhattan on the west side of Manhattan. But I was asked by Lisa Phillips, who had, while I was director at the downtown branch of the Whitney, had been head of branch museums and was at this point in the late 1990s, a curator at the Whitney Museum. And the Whitney was embarking upon the project, The American Century, Art and Culture, 1900 to 2000, which was really the largest exhibition of American art that had ever been launched. It occupied the entire Breuer building for 2 exhibitions, and then for 2 parts, both up to 1950 and then from 1950 to 2000, and that was followed by a biennial exhibition at the Whitney. And so that took up an entire year's programming at the museum that devoted really to this one exhibition project. And you also see an installation shot there. I think it's the 4th floor of the Whitney as you're entering on to what was an investigation of pop art, and also there further in the distance, minimalist art. But it was an amazing opportunity to work with the amazing resources of the Whitney Museum and other institutions around the world to really explore an overview of 20th century American art, which was very much the mandate for the Whitney Museum, because it is a museum of American art, and its focus really begins in 1900 with the 20th century.
Well, and your journey continued. So, in terms of across, different museums, and I think that you bring a wealth of experience and a different lens as you have worked at the Norton Museum of Art, the Samuel Dorsky Museum of Art, Newport Art Museum in Newport, Rhode Island, as well as the Nassau County Art Museum. And we'll flip back to the Norton Museum and let you kind of lead us through that journey.
Right. Well, I was at the Whitney to really work on the American Century exhibition, which was a project. So in 2000, after the exhibition was installed and opened to the public, I was very fortunate to be able to accept the position as chief curator and curator of European art at the Norton Museum, which is in West Palm Beach, Florida. You're looking at the Norton Museum has also been completely recreated just very recently, but you're looking at the old east facade of the Norton Museum down in West Palm Beach, as well as just an example of its permanent collections, which it was really wonderful for me to be able to not only be a chief curator there, overseeing both fields of American and Chinese and photography, as well as contemporary art, but also specifically I was in charge of European works there, and the Norton Museum has a wonderful collection of early 20th century modernist works. You're looking at an image of their Braque and their Brancusi and one of their Picassos, and it was a collection that was very rich in early 20th century, and a very wonderful opportunity to explore that field, because up to this point, much of my museum career had been based at the Whitney Museum in association with American art. Although I had done my doctoral work on 19th century French painting and earlier modernism, it was a wonderful opportunity to really apply those studies and embark a little bit more within the field of European modernism.
Wonderful. And then your journey took you to the Dorsky.
From then, I was like, I accepted the position at the Dorsky Museum of Art, which is at the State University of New York in New Paltz. We're talking about it's about an hour and a half north of New York City in the Hudson Valley. And I show you this picture of really the campus of SUNY New Paltz. There is a mural by Remer Cardillo. It's called From the Amazon to the Hudson River Valley. Remer's work was something that I, in a sense, discovered and started exploring while I was there at SUNY New Paltz. Remer was the head of the printmaking department, had been so for many, many years. He is a Uruguayan American artist and of extraordinary talents and abilities. I had done a lot of work in Lower Manhattan back in the 80s with print workshops that had emerged there. And Remer was actually, during the late 70s and early 80s, also a printmaker in Lower Manhattan. But met him, became fascinated with his work, and a little bit later I'm going to talk about like several other versions of exhibitions that I also executed subsequently to my time at New Paltz, but dealing with Reamer's work. And one of the other major exhibitions that was launched there at the Samuel Dorsky Museum of Art was Milton Avery and the End of Modernism. The Dorsky Museum had this wonderful card players from 1945. I had written my undergraduate thesis on Milton Avery, and from the collection of the Whitney Museum, as well as the SUNY Purchases collections at the Neuberger Museum of Art, was able to bring together a wonderful exhibition of works by Milton Avery.
Wonderful. And Newport, I know we've talked a lot about your experience at Newport as well as then at the Nassau.
I think we have a couple of slides here of the Newport Museum of Art, and it is also, and the Artists Association there in Newport, Rhode Island. You see the Griswold House is a great historic structure, and you see both an exterior stick-style architecture. It was a Richard Morris Hunt building from 1864, and also the inside entrance hall. And I wanted to show this image partly because the exhibition on view was really works borrowed from the Newport Historical Society, which is right down the street from the Art Museum, but had within its collections, and really in storage, an amazing body of work of early American painting, both portraiture as well as marinescape, which you would expect in Newport, being a major port city from the Revolutionary period forward. And they were very generous at the Historical Society, and sort of in a collaborative effort that they allowed the Art Museum to display their permanent collection on a very long-term loan that lasted many years. I think now that Art Museum still has this major grand hall, hung salon style, but I think the portraiture has switched over to mostly early 20th century portraiture from that museum's collection. And we go on to the next slide. We'll see the other building that is the Cushing Gallery at the Newport Art Museum and Artists Association. So if we could go on to the next slide, we might be, okay, there we have it. It's the Cushing Gallery is also something of a historic building, very, very different style from the Griswold House from 1919. It's by Williams Adams Delano. And within that building, the museum does many of its rotating exhibitions, but also has a gallery devoted to the work of Howard Gardner Cushing, one of the great American impressionists and figurative impressionists. So very often compared to such figures as Renoir in terms of his interest in light, and also just the social gathering within the late 19th and early 20th century America. And after the Newport Art Museum, I went to the Nassau County Museum of Art, which is on the north shore of Long Island in Roslyn Harbor, New York. It's actually the old Frick estate. And the centerpiece or where of the property is 145 acres of beautiful gardens, as well as sculpture park, as well as just a wilderness preserve on the north shore of Long Island, with this Ogden Codman mansion from 1901 that is used as the gallery space for the museum. And I executed many projects there over the almost decade that I was director at the Nassau County Museum. And here you're seeing a picture of the installation of the paintings of Louis Comfort Tiffany, which are works from a Long Island collection that actually came to the museum and became part of its permanent collection during my tenure there at the museum. And many people don't know that Louis Comfort Tiffany was also a painter as well. Most people are very familiar with his glass, as well as Tiffany design in general. because he was of the Tiffany family of Tiffany and Company. And but early in his career, he was an American artist, and quite a rare American artist in the sense that he traveled over North Africa and the Middle East and became an American Orientalist, which was a fairly common form of art and artistic practice among European artists. But Americans lived a little bit further away from the Middle East than European artists, and so he's really one of the few great Orientalists. And it's also interesting to know how Orientalist or Oriental art or Middle Eastern art and North African art really influenced Tiffany design and sense of decoration. And when you consider the glass and tile work from that part of the world, it had a huge influence on the development of Tiffany and the Art Nouveau style. And if we move on, I think we're going to look at a few other exhibitions. I wanted to include this project, which was Abstract Expressionism Reconsidered, abbreviated as ABEX Recon, which was an exhibition which looked back at abstract expressionism. And many of the women artists and artists of color that are often not included in overviews of abstract expressionism. There was also a wonderful component that every gallery in the exhibition also included examples of what we call abstraction before abstraction, which was something of a collaboration with Anthony Corner, who's the CEO of Art Forum magazine. That here you see a gallery that's filled in the center with Chinese scholar stones as an example of an abstract form of art and culture that existed, centuries before abstract expressionism. And other forms ranged from American splatterware, actually from here in Virginia, to the in pieces of books in which the oil papers are extraordinarily abstract designs. And I also wanted to show the cover of the catalog because that's a work by Judith Godwin, who I claim to be, possibly the last true living abstract expressionist painter, but a native of Virginia. And she still lives and works in New York City. There was an entire gallery devoted just to her paintings from the late 1950s, which was an extraordinary, body of work that, like many other women and many other practitioners of abstract expressionism, are, still deserve much further study and recognition. And if we go on to the next slide.
Well, and that this gives that opportunity too. I think as we look here is you've curated, Karl, numerous exhibitions over your career, and share with us the ones that you're most proud of, especially in this past 10 years, which I think both of these speak to that that bubble up to the top.
Yes, I think we're going to look at just a couple of more projects, which were very close to my heart. At the Nassau County Museum of Art, there's an Alex Katz exhibition, which was selections from the collection of the Whitney Museum of American Art. An exhibition that we added a catalog to. And also, again, as I mentioned before, there were several iterations of Remer Cardillo's work that I was able to explore in different exhibitions. Each exhibition was a different exhibition rather than just the same exhibition traveling to a new space. But Remer's work, which is extensive. He began his career as a printmaker. As I mentioned, he's a Uruguayan American artist, lived his early life in and around Montevideo, but immigrated to the United States in the late 70s, really as the result of the rise of an oppressive military regime in Uruguay at that time, which was happening throughout, South America during the 70s and into the early 80s. And here you see a piece which is called a Kupi. His Reamer's work sort of gravitated from an extraordinary career in printmaking to expanding the field of printmaking itself in order to embrace installation art. And what you see is a piece that's actually made up of thousands and thousands of small cast pieces of paper. So it comes out of the print that are formed into this conical shape that is referred to as a kupi, which is a Guarani word, a Native American word for anthill. And that it has references not only to giant anthills in South America, but also Native American cultures. And Reamer's work has been engaged with issues of the environment and the preservation of the natural environment and natural species, for many, many years. And I find one of the very intriguing things about it is that he makes very clearly the associations between genocide or the demise of Native American cultures and the loss of biodiversity within plant and animal life throughout the world. We could go on, and I think there's a couple of more examples of exhibitions that, before we go on to like other works by Reamer, this is one of the more recent exhibitions that I curated at the Nassau County Museum of Art. It is Kinney Scharf and Glamorous Graffiti. This, as you see on the left, is a picture of actually the same gallery that you were looking at before, but finally we were able to sort of break down the temporary walls to show this extraordinary interior at the Nassau County Museum of Art. It's actually the interior that comes from one of the great houses of England that was brought to the United States in 1920 by the Fricks when they moved into this structure. And it is old-growth American pine, possibly old-growth Virginia pine. But you see, I do like to often like to see, contemporary art in more historical galleries. But the image on the right is just in the next gallery. So you're stepping from that beautifully wood paneled room into what was a recreation of the basement of Kinney's studio space in Brooklyn. He was relocating his practice from Brooklyn to Los Angeles, which was actually his home and where he grew up. And but in his basement, over the 1 or 2 decades, I think, that he was in residence there, he turned his basement into something of a disco club with just collecting scraps of materials, waste, plastic from around the community and reinstalling it within his own studio to create this environment that was then lit by black lights, and there was, fabulous music playing, which was extremely entertaining. But that's an environment that you can actually walk through and dance in and lounge in, and was really greatly enjoyed by the community there. And I think if we move forward, we'll see, and we're just going to look. I think Cindy mentioned that there were several exhibitions that I explored Reamer Cardillo's work. And while that was an artist that I first met and had an exhibition of at the Dorsky Museum, and then had another reiteration of an exhibition at the Nassau County Museum, there are 2 other sites that I also did Reamer Cardillo exhibitions at. First, the Art Museum of the Americas, which is a little known and very institution in Washington, D.C. It's part of the Organization of American States. It is actually right on the mall there in Washington, D.C. And there was a project there. And then had the pleasure and privilege of taking Reamer's work to the Museo Nacional the Artes Visuales in Montevideo, Uruguay, which is really the national gallery of the country of Uruguay there in Montevideo. It's a beautiful modernist structure in the Park Rodo but you can see Reamer's exhibition really took over the entire National Gallery. He's a very prolific artist, and you can see both another iteration of a coupé in the installation shot on the lower level, while on the upper level in this shot you can see a mini series of prints that Reamer executed throughout his life. And it made a very dynamic and wonderful exploration of an artist's work that does explore environmental issues, as well as I mentioned before, as well as the issues of Native American and indigenous cultures and their preservation and continuation.
Congratulations, Karl, on your work with Reamer and following him throughout his career. And I just wanted to show your scholarly work as well in terms of the publication that you've come out with as you followed Reamer, but also, as you said, as you traveled, each exhibition was very unique and use the space like we see here in a different way. So highlighting different parts as you curated Reamer's exhibition.
I haven't gone on too long, and because I think we were hoping to have time for questions.
Exactly. And the first one, what would you say is your curatorial philosophy?
That's a very interesting question. I was very lucky throughout my career to work with many wonderful individuals within the museum profession at different institutions that had different specializations and different sizes and different kinds of focus. And all museum work is teamwork. There's just no question about that. Nothing that you see happens that's in a museum happens without, a vast number of people from many behind the scenes that do absolutely extraordinary work. And I've been very fortunate to work with many wonderful professionals within the field throughout the country, and have found the staff and the leadership, here at the Taubman Museum of Art to also just be an extraordinary group of professionals. And that really enables curatorial work. As I said, there's no doing it on its own, but I'm also always looking for opportunities to execute projects that are, what would I say? They're unique chances to be able to bring works to the public. You saw the Kenny Scharf Cosmic Cavern installation. It's a monumental installation, a very unique work within contemporary American art, and really, in many ways, a masterpiece of that American master's career. And it was just the fact that through friends and at the Nassau County Museum of Art, I learned that Kenny was moving to California and in a sense abandoning this incredible work. And so we were able to go into his studio and really deinstall it and then reinstall it. And that project actually went on to be the centerpiece for the East Village show at the Museum of Modern Art. And I think is still in storage, I think now out in California for future iterations. And that kind of opportunity that allows you to do things that will, in a sense, enable these wonderful objects and these wonderful artists to be presented to the public.
Well, and I think that dovetails into a number of questions that have come through in terms of community, like your example with Kenny Scharf and being able to really inspire and engage the visitor. What are some of the plans as we work together in terms of for the museum, for the Taubman Museum of Art and the upcoming exhibitions and beyond in terms of community engagement and programming And the lineup, even perhaps film, was one of the questions too.
Okay, that's a broad question.
It is.
I'll take a stab at it. That yeah, it's been wonderful to arrive here in Roanoke and at the Taubman Museum of Art, and really just delve into the installation process for several exhibitions that are on the schedule, which I very much look forward to helping everyone here usher through over the coming year. It's a very dynamic and very diverse exhibition schedule, and also like an absolutely magnificent institution to work in. I've been fortunate throughout my career to work in a lot of different kinds of galleries and exhibition spaces, and but none, I would say, quite as beautiful and spectacular, and also as functional as the Taubman Museum of Art. It's quite an amazing structure, and it also like serves a very broad community, because this is the largest, and I would say the most spectacular arts and cultural organization for a very wide chunk of the United States. You have to go quite a ways to find an institution of this caliber and this quality, and that has both the resources and the staff to make amazing programming happen and bring to the community. And whenever, at most institutions that I've been involved in, like when I was chief curator at the Norton Museum, that position also oversaw not only the curatorial department, but the education department. And my title here is Deputy Director of Exhibitions and Community Engagement at the Taubman Museum of Art, allows me to continue to very much bridge that gap between curatorial work and the education work that goes on within institutions, and interpreting programming for the public and welcoming the public, and making sure that the museum is a very accessible place for all members of the community.
Oh, thank you, Karl. We look forward to that continued goal of welcoming community. And one of the questions was, of course, re-engaging. We have reopened, and since July, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, and look to the future, but with many virtual components like this today, in order to continue to engage and bring in different parts, just like studio visits and collector visits that we have done together so far. And you've covered a couple of the other questions already as you've woven through, but the strengths of the Taubman and what attracted you not only to the museum, but also to the Roanoke Valley, and being here in a smaller city in Southwest Virginia.
Well, it's actually quite a large city compared to New Paltz or High Falls, where I was living in the Hudson Valley, and I guess that's where I just fell in love with that practice of trying to hike out into the countryside, because they have that. Like this Blue Ridge region is very much like a wonderful like environment in which the outdoors and nature is very accessible from right here in the city. And I'm very much right now staying very close to the museum and in downtown Roanoke, and very much enjoying walking around and getting to know the community in downtown.
Well, we are very thrilled to have Karl Willers, Ph.D., as our new Chief Curator and Deputy Director of Exhibitions and Community Engagement. Join us here at the Taubman Museum of Art in Roanoke, Virginia, and really engage our visitors as we continue in terms of exhibitions, learning and integrating your scholarly work and the ideas that you bring to the table, the new lens and perception, as well as that community part. So, and there's a number of comments that have come through in terms of welcoming you, thanking you for joining and coming to the Roanoke Valley, and that excitement also of the local artists and the regional, as we open back up into our triennial and the Homeward Bound coming up in this next year, and you being able to meet the community here one by one as it is possible.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And I would also add that the opportunity to work with collections here at the museum is quite extraordinary. I've been extraordinary. I was very excited to find one of the largest collections of Eakins paintings in this country that reside here at the Taubman Museum of Art, as well as the Horace Fralin Charitable Trust gifts to the museum in late 19th and early 20th century American art are just extraordinary examples, just the best of American art. And it's a field that I've worked in much of my life, and I very much look forward to working with such collections and bringing them to the community.
Well, and thank you, Carl. We look forward for you to re-envision with our permanent collection as we reinstall in the future and bring out the Aikens and continue to do research on our permanent collection, which is over 2,200 works of art. And Carl and I just finished last night. We did a peek into the vault as a virtual, as well as exactly talking about Aikens and talking about the works in that 19th and 20th century American art. That is our focus and our strength of our permanent collection.
Well, thank you, and it's wonderful to be here.
And thank you for joining us today for a conversation with the curator, Dr. Karl E. Willers, and welcoming him to our community. And look forward to having you come in person and on site at another time as we will welcome Karl into our galleries to talk about upcoming exhibitions. Thank you and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.